Thank you, Sheila Page, ODI. I did have a bit of a discussion over coffee on some of this. Two very general points. The first apply really to any exercise of this sort, and that is, what are you assuming about how the countries and how the regions, that'll be harder, respond themselves? I mean, what do they don't just sit there and wait for the climate change or the climate change financing to hit them and do nothing. You're going to have a great deal of trouble, particularly over a 15-year period, working out how the different governments will respond in different ways. We heard the Colombian example earlier today. Could you have forecast that if you've been doing this 15 years ago? What are you going to assume? And that's why the period seems long. Why it seems short is you actually want to leave countries in 2030 in a reasonable state. I was struck by Alison's mention of fracking. A country could choose a fracking type solution for this, and that would be fine up to 2030, but it might not be ideal after 2030. And I think that from a climate point of view, it seems a terribly short-term one, unless, rather than saying what will the effects be during this period, say how will the countries be positioned at the end of that period.
Yeah. Bernadette has the privilege of sitting here, wants to ask a question.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question from one side to the panel to the other side of the panel. The SDGs that you selected, why did you not select also the goal on economic growth? If I got it right in your... Oh, you did. Okay, cool. Then
and
that's
still the question, so your suggestions on which to select is still welcome anyway. Yeah. So but you're emphasising that. One more comment from down that end. Was there anything else beyond? Yeah, can I just go here, Pip? Would you excuse me? Yes, this lady here, please.
I'm Phương, working for a British charity working on climate change in Vietnam. May I ask, I'm from the National, from Vietnam, so I would like to see the result of this research, this kind of research. Will it be able to help the national government in any of the regions here in the negotiation? And for example, I understand my country context that all the data quantitatively produced, if they bring it to the international negotiation, it has to be agreed by the government. So it's not an outsider research that they can take up and bring it to the negotiation table. So what is the purpose of this kind of research? Is it supporting the affected country in different regions, or supporting the government of the UK?
Oh, okay. I attempt to answer that question, no, I think if I may. CDKN is funding this work. CDKN is publicly funded by the British and the Dutch governments presently. All our results and research are publicly accessible, so they're available to anybody, anywhere, the results when they're complete. And they may be used by institutions in government. Now we're bedded into working closely with 13 governments. Unfortunately, our resources haven't allowed us to work extensively with your government, although we have done some research support in partnership with national institutions in Vietnam. And so it's a choice of a government how it wishes to use this in negotiations. And as we know, it's a fairly plural approach to UNFCCC in terms of how data is brought to bear through negotiators. But CDKN works with 3 major negotiation blocks and supports them, and they choose where they draw their evidence. So that doesn't fully answer your question, but I think it's a sovereign issue about how data is brought to bear by negotiators, and CDKN would not, A, would not interfere in that process, and B, the views of CDKN are independent of those of the British government and the Dutch governments who finance our work.
Maybe if I just say a quick response to the 3 other points, and then Anil, if you want to add further. Yeah, thank you. First of all, about what assumptions about how countries themselves will respond. We don't have an answer for that at the moment, but I think my answer would be that we have to make very clear what our assumptions are, and that the application of the methodology is transparent, and that it's very clear what the assumptions are, what we feel the limitations of it are, and what potential caveats of our etc. So just to make that explicit within the process as we deliver the research. What about the post-2030? We agree, very important. We're not, in a way, our scope of work is that 2015 to 2030, but we recognise that something also needs to be said about post-2030 and the potential risks for sustaining particular outcomes beyond that period. And thirdly, Bernadette was really about which SDGs. Sorry, that table was only an example that you know was put together for the meeting, and initial screening I think has suggested that potentially we might be looking at 10 SDGs. Selecting them based on different criteria about how strong their influence is to economic growth and development, poverty alleviation, etc. How strong the climate risk is to those different SDGs. And we had 3 criteria that we've screened them very initially just for discussion today. But there will be further discussion of that as we move through the process.
Yes. Very briefly, I think the answers, I have not much to add. The local actions are obviously important, and we can't spell them all possibilities out. So we have to make some selective examples. Countries like Bangladesh are putting a lot of money into adaptation programs now, significant amounts, and other countries with major problems and disasters may do likewise. So we may include again, once we spell out what a low ambition and a high ambition means, we will be able to say a little bit more about this. But I don't think we'll be able to get away with just one version of low ambition and one of high. The high ambition may have different variants, but we can't proliferate these too much but some can be done. And yes, climate change doesn't end in 2030, so we have to look beyond that. Those are the main comments.
Good. Well, thank you very much for that opportunity to hear that, and thanks to Anil and Nigel for that.